Chronicles rebuilt, they erased it from the map. It came back. Pivot point, February 13th, 1945, 10:03 p.m. The air raid sirens have been sounding for 4 minutes. In the streets of Dresden, people are running toward basements, toward shelters, toward anything solid. Above them, 796 British Lancaster bombers are approaching in the darkness. Dresden has not been seriously bombed in this war. Its residents have begun to believe it never will be. The city is famous for its Baroque architecture, its art museums, its porcelain. It calls itself the Florence of the Elbe. It is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. In the next 14 hours, it will be destroyed. And in the next 40 years, it will be rebuilt, not once, but twice, by 2 different nations with 2 completely different visions of what Dresden should become. This is the story of a city that was erased and refused to disappear. To understand what is about to be lost, you need to understand what Dresden was. Founded in the 13th century on the banks of the Elbe River, in what is now eastern Germany, Dresden had grown over 600 years into one of the most refined cities in Europe. Its golden age came in the early 18th century under Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony, who transformed the city into a showcase of Baroque and Rococo splendor. Augustus built the Zwinger, a palace complex of such extraordinary beauty that architects still study it as one of the finest examples of Baroque architecture in the world. He built the Frauenkirche, the Church of Our Lady, whose dome dominated the Dresden skyline and was considered an engineering marvel of its time. He established the Dresden State Art Collections, filling them with Raphael's Sistine Madonna, Vermeer, Rembrandt, Titian. He brought craftsmen from across Europe and China to manufacture Dresden porcelain, Meissen, which became the most coveted luxury item on the continent. By 1900, Dresden had a population of nearly 600,000 people. It was a center of art, music, and manufacturing. Richard Wagner had lived here. Friedrich Nietzsche had walked these streets. The Semperoper, the Dresden Opera House, was considered one of the finest in the world. By February 1945, the population had swelled to perhaps 800,000, including hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing the advancing Soviet army from the east. The war was clearly lost for Germany. Dresden had little strategic military value. Its air defenses were minimal. None of this would save it. The first wave hits at 10:14 p.m. on February 13th. 244 Lancasters dropped their payload in 2 passes. High explosives first, to blow off roofs and expose the timber frames beneath. Then incendiaries, to ignite everything the explosives have opened up. The fires start immediately. 3 hours later, at 1:22 a.m. on February 14th, the second wave arrives. 550 more Lancasters. By now, the fires from the first wave are visible from 100 miles away. The bomber crews use them as navigation points. They drop their bombs into the center of the inferno. The fires merge. They create something that had been seen only once before in this war. In Hamburg in 1943, a firestorm. The fires become so large and so hot that they generate their own wind system. Air rushes inward toward the center of the blaze at hurricane force. 60, 70 miles per hour, feeding the fire with oxygen. Temperatures at the center reach over 1,500 degrees Celsius. Asphalt melts, glass melts. People in the streets are lifted off their feet and pulled into the flames. No, in the shelters beneath the city, people suffocate as the firestorm consumes all available oxygen. The next morning, February 14th, 311 American B-17 arrives for a third wave of bombing. By the time it ends, the historic center of Dresden 4 square miles of Baroque and Rococo architecture accumulated over 6 centuries is gone. The Zwinger is gutted. The Semperoper is a shell. The Frauenkirche has collapsed into a mound of rubble. 33,000 people are dead. Some estimates place the figure higher. The true number has never been established with certainty. Dresden, the Florence of the Elbe, is a field of ruins. What happens next is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of urban reconstruction, and it happens in 2 completely separate chapters, under 2 completely different political systems, with 2 completely different ideas about what a city is for. Chapter 1 begins immediately. Even before the war ends, even as bombing raids continue elsewhere in Germany, Dresden survivors begin clearing rubble. Not because anyone has ordered them to, because the alternative is to do nothing, and doing nothing is impossible. When Germany surrenders in May 1945, Dresden finds itself in the Soviet occupation zone, soon to become East Germany. The communist government that takes control faces an immediate question. What do you do with a city that is 70% destroyed? The answer they give will define Dresden for the next 45 years. The East German government makes a decision that is both pragmatic and ideological. The historic center, the Baroque palaces, the churches, the opera house, represents the aristocratic and bourgeois past. It represents Augustus the Strong and his court, wealth and privilege and the old order. Some party officials argue it should be left as rubble, a monument to the failures of capitalism and fascism. Others argue differently. Dresden's ruins are also a propaganda opportunity, evidence of Western Allied war crimes, of capitalist brutality against a civilian population. The ruins should be preserved as witness, and selectively, carefully, the most powerful symbols should be rebuilt to show the world that socialism can restore what capitalism destroyed. The result is a compromise that satisfies no one completely, but produces something extraordinary. The Zwinger is rebuilt first, so it takes from 1945 to 1963. 18 years of painstaking reconstruction, brick by brick, using the original plans, salvaging original stones from the rubble wherever possible. When it reopens, it is as close to the original as human skill can make it. The Semperoper follows. He rebuilt over decades and reopened in 1985, exactly 40 years after its destruction, to a ceremony attended by the leaders of East Germany and broadcast across the Eastern Bloc as proof of socialist cultural achievement. New residential districts rise around the historic core. Functionalist apartment blocks, practical, identical, efficient. The aesthetic of a state that values collective need over individual expression. And the Frauenkirche, the East German government leaves it as rubble, deliberately, a permanent monument to the bombing, a wound kept open to make a point. Then, in November 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. Dresden is in the streets that night. The city has been a center of the peaceful revolution that brings down the East German state. Mass demonstrations in October 1989, confrontations with police, a population that has decided it will no longer accept what it has been told to accept. When reunification comes in 1990, Dresden faces its second reconstruction, and the question of the Frauenkirche, left as rubble for 45 years, suddenly becomes urgent. The decision to rebuild it is made quickly, but the how takes longer to resolve. The original church had been built between 1726 and 1743. Its plans existed. Many of its stones were still in the rubble pile that had been maintained as a monument in the city center. A computer model is created using photographs taken before the destruction. Every stone in the rubble pile is cataloged, numbered, and analyzed to determine where it originally belonged. The reconstruction begins in 1994. It uses the original sandstone wherever possible. The blackened, fire-damaged stones from the original church are incorporated into the new structure, visible against the lighter new stone as dark patches. The church wears its own history on its skin. On October 30th, 2005, 60 years after its destruction, the Frauenkirche is reconsecrated. The golden cross atop its rebuilt dome was crafted in Britain by the son of one of the pilots who flew in the bombing raid that destroyed it. Dresden had rebuilt itself twice. Stand in Dresden today and you are standing in 3 cities simultaneously. The first is the Baroque city of Augustus the Strong, the Zwinger, the Semperoper, the rebuilt Frauenkirche, the palaces along the Elbe, reconstructed, restored, stubbornly present. The second is the East German city, the functionalist residential blocks, the broad socialist boulevards, the infrastructure of a state that no longer exists but left its bones in the urban fabric. The third is the reunified city, the new buildings that have risen since 1990, the museums and hotels and commercial districts that have grown up around the historic core. No other city in Europe contains this many layers in so compressed a space. See, Dresden is a living archaeology of the 20th century. The population today is approximately 570,000, less than the 800,000 of 1945, but a functioning, thriving city that by any reasonable measure should not exist. The Elbe still runs through it. The Zwinger still gleams. The Frauenkirche dome still dominates the skyline, its rebuilt stone still marked with the scars of what happened on 14 February 1945. The city chose not to hide those scars. It chose to make them visible, to build around them and through them and with them. We tend to think of destruction as the end of a story. Dresden suggests it can be the beginning of several. A city erased in 14 hours, rebuilt under communism as a monument to ideology, rebuilt again under democracy as an act of collective memory. The Frauenkirche standing today with its original blackened stones visible in its walls, not hidden, not replaced, but incorporated, made part of the new structure. Why, that is not just architecture, that is a philosophy. That wounds do not have to be concealed, that what has been broken can be rebuilt, and that the rebuilding itself is part of the story worth telling. Dresden was erased from the map on February 14, 1945. It came back, and it brought its scars with it. If this reconstruction moved you, hit the like button and subscribe. We rebuild lost worlds every week. Next episode, another city that refused to disappear. Thanks for watching.